Ladies, gentlemen, vagabonds of all shapes and sizes. The problem with the gaming industry is there's too many the problem with the gaming industry videos. Now, let's be honest, it's not like any of us cover any new problems. Why, between Total Biscuit and the Jimquisition, everything worth talking about was covered or predicted 10 years ago.
Is games media worse than it used to be? I don't necessarily think so, because frankly, the internet won't let it. It's still pretty bad in many ways, and I think that we can be a hell of a lot better. And that's what I'd like to discuss today.
More and more, EA's homogenizing its games. The horror series Dead Space becoming a cooperative cover-based shooter. RPGs like Mass Effect and Dragon Age getting online modes. And it's not just EA, of course. Tomb Raider's getting multiplayer, Fear 3's getting co-op. More and more, games are all boasting the same feature sets, the same options, because publishers are pre-chunky prego. They're all trying to distill the most successful elements of the most successful video games to create their very own perfect pasta sauce.
I think we need to think differently, and I'd like to think I think differently. I started in the food and hospitality industry, construction, food safety, and logistics. And as different as all these occupations are, they all emphasize standards and regulations because the world falls apart without them. To me, the Final Destination movies aren't about fate and the inevitability of death. They're about how lack of oversight is a machine that turns OSHA violations into dead bodies. To my horror, many problems in the gaming industry are systemic. In gamer terms, it's like when you try to play Skyrim, and you swear you're not going to play as a stealth archer this time, but one way or another, your character ends up crouched, out of sight, slinging arrows from afar. In business, systemic issues mean that sometimes there are bad people rigging the system, but mostly there's just people, and the system creates unintended behaviors. They're some of the most difficult to root out. You can't just point your fingers at a bad guy and go, "That's the one, officer. Take him away, boys." We did it. We saved the town. And worst of all, any solution you come up with for a systemic problem will probably get removed one day, because good solutions make people forget what the problems were to begin with. It's like getting a new manager that's really gung-ho about cutting costs so they get rid of all the fire safety equipment to save a few grand a year. Do the math. Fire safety has theoretically infinite value. But you can't plug theoretics into a spreadsheet. On the other hand, saving money from fire inspections, now that makes a pretty pie chart. This is called the McNamara Fallacy. Do you know this one? It's when you make decisions based solely on numbers and ignore everything you can't measure. Because if you can't measure it, then it must not be important. It was named after Robert McNamara, that one guy in Black Ops Zombies that wasn't Nixon, Kennedy, or Castro. And old Bob was obsessed with data and statistics. He was a big manufacturing whiz who worked his way up the Ford Company ladder and eventually became the U.S. Secretary of Defense, where he made questionable decisions during the Vietnam War like Project 100,000. He saw warfare as a math problem, where all soldiers are essentially created equal, and the U.S. had superior equipment, so mathematically he could win the war by lowering military standards and recruiting an extra 100,000 soldiers each year who didn't make the weight limit, had minor physical disabilities, or were mentally handicapped. Yes, that is how Forrest Gump ended up serving in the Vietnam War. And these soldiers perished at a rate 3 times higher than standard recruits. If these kinds of mistakes are happening in one of the highest positions in the U.S. with literal lives on the line, what hope does anyone else have? Forget about villains. Narcissists, sociopaths, Doofenshmirtz, Evil Incorporated. There are hundreds of statistical fallacies and psychological pitfalls you're inevitably going to run into. Riddle me this. How is a competent person supposed to run a business if that person does not think of themselves as competent? That's imposter syndrome working against you. That's also the Dunning-Kruger effect, which also states that incompetent people have a habit of overestimating their abilities. Are you competent or are you cocky? Well, the fact that you're wondering probably means that maybe you're competent, but maybe you're not, because there's also the Peter Principle, which states every employee tends to rise to his level of incompetence. Think about it. In most workplaces, if you do well, you get a promotion. You do well again, you get another promotion, and on until eventually you end up in a role where you don't do well, you don't get promoted, and you've finally plateaued at your level of incompetence. The video game industry especially has a problem with this because a lot of promotional roles are corporate management roles. That sounds backwards, does it not? Imagine you're a developer and you make a game of the year and your reward is you don't get to make games anymore, you get to wear a tie, here's a clipboard, you're now a supervisor. I reckon there's a funny reverse correlation that Bethesda's games get worse the higher Todd Howard climbs the corporate ladder. Harada, the director of Tekken, spoke about this in regards to Soul Calibur and how the passionate developers were slowly peeled away and put into organizational roles which eventually killed the franchise. Repeat after me. The consequence of systemic issues is mediocrity. But in a world of data-driven McNamaras, you can choose to be a Deming. Who? After World War II, America had to help rebuild Japan. General MacArthur grew frustrated because he couldn't make a single phone call without the line going dead. I'd say dropping 2 atomic bombs tends to have that effect. So, to help out with the infrastructure, he brought over a statistics professor / private business consultant out of New York, W. Edwards Deming. He trained hundreds of engineers, managers, and scholars. Japanese businessmen especially took a liking to Deming, including Akio Morita, the co-founder of Sony Corporation. I probably butchered his name. And with his teachings, Japan became a dominant force in global manufacturing, completely turned their reputation around.
No wonder this circuit failed. It says made in Japan.
What do you mean, Doc? All the best stuff is made in Japan.
Unbelievable.
What did Deming say to them? In a word, quality first. Is that one word or is that two? But quality first is easier said than done. A system cannot understand itself. Deming believed workers can only work as well as a system allows, and managers were responsible for taking care of that system. He gave them 14 points to follow. Number 1, create constancy of purpose. Any decision you make should be to improve your product and service so you can stay competitive, stay in business, and provide jobs. It's unfortunate, but a lot of AAA studios, especially in the US, have no forward-thinking plan. They start with the end goal, more money. They overhire. They rely too much on data, which makes them chase false trends. They drag their feet. Then they burn everything down. If you're trying to get money for a project, you have to present your video game like you're on Shark Tank. Here's the problem. Cutting staff takes time. It's dangerous. The slap chop is here to change. No, revolutionize making a handful of chicken salad. Here's the monetization model. The only purpose is short-term profits. Number 2, adopt the new philosophy. We are in a new economic age. Western management must awaken to the challenge, must learn their responsibilities and take on leadership for change. I wasn't going to include that one because he came up with it back in 1950, but you know what? I think it still applies. AAA needs to be more proactive, less reactive. An ounce of prevention is cheaper than a pound of cure. Number 3, cease dependence on inspection to achieve quality. Build quality into the product in the first place. Now that reminds me of when Phil Spencer was shocked by how awful Redfall turned out. He said he expected the reviews would be better because the internal mock reviews were double digits higher than low 60s. My guess is any mock reviewer or QA that didn't brown-nose Redfall was separated from the project. But worse than relying on inspection, nowadays I feel quality has gone down in general because AAA isn't afraid of releasing a mess anymore. They can fix it after the release and people will be okay with it. Go ahead, but most of you are not Cyberpunk or No Man's Sky. Those are still exceptions. Number 4, end the practice of awarding business on the basis of a price tag. Instead, minimize total cost. Good luck with that one because as I've said before, there's a lack of responsibility in the gaming industry. Again, hear how they speak. The cost of doing business, the industry standards, it's not my cost that I accrued, it's not this is how I choose to do business. The worst one is when a studio throws up their employees as a shield from criticism. They work hard, they have mouths to feed. The costs go up, the price will too. Then I will lay them all off and replace them with cheaper labor. Number 5, improve quality and productivity constantly and thus constantly decrease costs. This ties in with number 4. Quality and productivity lead to lower costs. If your costs are high, it's because you are most likely bloated or overvaluing things you shouldn't. Cutting costs does nothing if you don't address why they continue to rise in the first place. This is what peeves me about the rising price of gaming. The hardware and technology used to make them has gotten relatively cheaper while games themselves have gone in the other direction. Don't be fooled. There's bloat in the system. Number 6, institute training on the job. That's pretty straightforward, I would say. Number 7, the aim of supervision should be to help people and machines and gadgets do a better job. Now this is a tricky one because supervisors often end up micromanaging entire productions because they themselves are being micromanaged from on high. Your bad boss probably has a bad boss who also has a bad boss who likes to make changes on a whim. Number 8, drive out fear so that everyone may work effectively for the company. It's the opposite of the beatings will continue until morale improves. It's basic human nature. If people don't feel safe, it impacts their work. It's much more reassuring when you have a boss like Iowata who will take a pay cut to save the company. It inspires loyalty. Or at Valve in 2004, when Eric Wolpow was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, he was afraid he had to leave, but instead Gabe Newell offered him an extended leave with pay and told him, "Your job is to get better." That is your job description at Valve. So go home to your wife and come back when you're better. Eric then came back and wrote Portal 1 and 2. On the other end of the spectrum, there were bosses like Bobby Kotick who would lavish you with praise, money, and bonuses if your game did well, but went cold and aggressive if you didn't. It starts to psych people out, and I would wager that most of the cutthroat, backstabbing, cliquey behavior within the gaming industry is because people are afraid of job security. They aren't all Machiavellian, they're mostly cornered animals. Number 9, break down barriers between departments. The gaming industry is notorious for siloing itself. Siloing is when people or entire departments are kept separate from each other. It's incredibly inefficient to have to play a game of telephone to get anything done. It's also a commonly used manipulation tactic. A worker cannot protect themselves against corrupt management if the only person who knows what that worker's doing is their manager. Not to glaze Valve again, they're just the first example that comes to mind because they have what's called a horizontal hierarchy, where most everyone's basically on the same level and capable of doing multiple jobs. So say a writer can design better levels when they are also the environmental designer and the programmer. Highly efficient for if they ever make a third game of anything. Number 10, eliminate slogans and work quotas. The success of old Blizzard could be attributed to Morhaim's management because he would push back against aggressive, arbitrary deadlines. Instead, he believed a good game was delivered when it was delivered. Meanwhile, Bobby Kotick wanted to push for more and more with utmost frequency while saying things like he wanted a game to launch every quarter and a Guitar Hero game to launch every month. He kept hiring executives who ran factories, so it's no surprise Blizzard ended up being run like a factory. Number 11, remove barriers that rob the hour worker of his right to pride of workmanship. Simply put, Deming believed people worked better if they felt they were working on something special in a place that cared about them. If two places pay the same, then people are going to go to the company that gives their employees a reason to give a damn. At times, some employees even take lower paying jobs because they're choosing mental health over money. I think number 12 goes with 11, remove barriers that rob people in management of their right to pride of workmanship. See, Deming also had sympathy for middle managers. Managers often feel pressured to make crazy, absurd moves because they're judged on a merit system and arbitrary objectives on a quarterly and annual basis. They're often underappreciated because a manager who runs a well-oiled machine will often make themselves look redundant. Number 13, institute a vigorous program of education and self-improvement. You are never too good to learn. If you follow the history of your favorite franchises that fell off, most of it can be attributed to getting high on their own supply. They released some bangers, got cocky, forgot how hard they used to work to become king, and then fell out of touch with themselves. And the 14th point, the transformation is everybody's job. I say, there is a way. It's been done before. It's been proven to work. We're not doing anything new, nothing scary. And in my opinion, the United States AAA gaming industry has fallen behind the rest of the world. It mustn't take short-term deals with the devil. It mustn't lean on the success of the indie scene. It must pull itself up and reevaluate its goals, or it will collapse as it did in '77 and as it did in '83, and be at the mercy once more of the international scene. We must not allow for a video gaming gap. When Deming was asked how he would wish to be remembered in the US, he replied, "As someone who spent his life trying to keep America from committing suicide."